Hello, and welcome to the Hosodathon, the podcast that cultivates the farmland of films of one of the world's greatest animation directors, Mamoru Hosoda. I'm Michael Leader.
And I'm Steph Watts, and we've seen the lot of them.
And I'm Jake Cunningham, and I'm running with the wolves tonight. Again.
So join us on our quest into the glorious world of Mamoru Hosoda. Steph, Jake, welcome back. Third episode of the Hosodathon, building up steam. How are you enjoying it so far, Jake?
I'm having a great time. You heard how much I enjoyed Summer Wars. That got me very hyped for the rest of the series. And knowing what I know about this one going into it, I was carrying on that hype. You know, we've already established that we like films about children that can transform into wolves. And I knew that this film was more nature-based. And I've always been really curious. Having watched the previous films of Hosoda, I've never been able to mesh that filmmaker with the filmmaker that Ghibli wanted to hire, in a way. And I thought this is maybe the film, because I see a lot of comparisons to Ghibli on Twitter for this film. So this was one that I was really intrigued about, because in a way, from what I've seen, I can't imagine him as this more environmentally focused filmmaker. A lot of hype.
We should say that references to Wolfwalkers, the cartoon saloon film that came out earlier in 2021, which we loved, we covered in depth. And that, do you remember, Jake, the connection between Wolfwalkers and Mamoru Hosoda? That's not just the fact that there are kids who are wolves in it.
There are artists from Cartoon Saloon who did backgrounds on Belle, right?
But before that even. So, Hosoda's daughter provides one of the Japanese voices for the Japanese dub of Wolfwalkers. So, literally one of the wolf children in Wolfwalkers was provided by the wolf daddy himself.
Oh, he is the
Hosoda.
wolf daddy, isn't he? Yes. For the rest of the podcast, can we substitute the words Mamoru Hosoda for wolf daddy?
You heard it here first. Steph, are you still on board? Are you still enjoying rewatching these films?
I am super on board. This is one of my favourites, I think. So I was really excited to get to this film, especially after, Summer Wars, a little bit hot and cold on. So I'm quite excited to get into this film.
We'll have our own war about that by the end of this, won't we?
I'm sure we will.
So we should kick off, really. We'll have the synopsis, context, review sections. We should say there are spoilers from the off. That this film goes hard quickly, doesn't it? So, listeners, if you haven't watched Wolf Children, go and watch it, and then come back and hear more about it from us. But we should kick off with your synopsis, Steph.
Wolf Children is the story of Hannah, a woman who falls in love with a wolf man and gives birth to his half-human, half-wolf children. So that's all you really need to know about the plot. Very short and sweet there. But Michael, what do we need to know about kind of how this film got made? Where are we in Hosoda's journey up to this point?
Contrasting your short and sweet synopsis with one of my rambly context sections, as always. So, Summer Wars was a success, as we talked about on that episode, and after that, Hosoda has the opportunity to go. Hosoda has the opportunity to go independent, and he sets up his own studio in April 2011 with the producer Yuichiro Saito, and they call it Studio Chizu. And Jake, do you know what Chizu means?
Of course I don't, but I've seen the running order now.
Chizu means map, which of course probably is firing off some of your happy hormones right there off the back of all the talk we've had of maps.
Within 2 feet of me, I can show you the book that I've been preserving for my summer holiday read when I finally go on summer holiday. It's called On the Map, and it's a history book about maps. So, yes, I'm very excited. Go on, tell me why is it called that, Michael?
Well, the sense of maps is central to the studio philosophy. They've got a bit of a blurb on their website which lays out their ethos, and this is what they say. There is a long history of animation films represented more often than not by those of Toei and Disney, but there are still unexplored motifs and themes with limitless possibilities. Be self-reliant and determined with a spirit of challenge like adventurers, setting sail out to the big seas toward a frontier of possibilities, and to discover a new continent of movies that nobody has ever seen before, and draw a new map on that uncharted land. The name embodies this philosophy. I mean, I'm on board.
Yeah.
They talk a good game, don't they?
Get rid of Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland. These guys should be doing Uncharted. It's even in their charter.
So Chizu is set up very much as an auteur studio to get Hosoda's projects made, and the first production they make is this film project, Wolf Children, and this is what Hosoda said about the inspiration behind that movie. He said, at the time, there were many couples around me having kids, and they, especially the mothers, looked really cool and shone in my eyes. That's when I wondered if I could make a movie about raising kids, and I made what I admired and yearned to experience into a movie. So he's very much coming from the perspective of seeing all the people around him have kids, kind of marveling at the dedication, the investment of having children. Of course, we mentioned this in summer, was that Satoko Okudera was a mum, and she's his co-screenwriter, so he works with her again on this project. By that point, she was a mother of a 5-year-old, and they work on the script collaboratively. She wrote 2 drafts, he wrote 2 drafts, they do a collaborative draft to finish, 3 months to make the screenplay. She talks about how she was too close to the vortex of motherhood to really be able to write the ultimate statement about parenting in this film. So she appreciated Hosoda's sort of more distanced, objective, maybe idealized view of what parenting is like. And she said the director's goal was to reach people who have children and people who don't. People with children, without children, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons. He wanted to make it a film that would give different emotions depending on who watched it. She's also very gracious because she thinks the best parts of the film are the ones that play out with no dialogue, almost silently, so don't have any of her dialogue in them. She said the movie seemed to tell its story softly and gently, but it was actually rich with the skill used in the direction and animation. So there are very dense images. I think it was like a compilation of Mamoru Hosoda's works. You know, we like to shout out other people behind the scenes. Returning on this is production designer Anri Jojo, who, for example, designs the house that the family moved to in the country, one of the film's key locations. We also have a newcomer to this, well, to our miniseries at least, which is Daisuke Iga, who is primarily a fashion designer, and he's brought on to design the character Hannah's clothes, which is kind of a bit out of the ordinary for animation, that you'd get somebody who usually works in real world fashion to design an animated character's fashion, but this becomes more of the norm for Hosoda's films going forward.
Interesting that she's not dressed like particularly flamboyantly either. You might expect that of Belle or Summer Wars or something, where you've got like the utopian internet where anything can happen.
Absolutely. So yeah, for relatively grounded characters, even less common. And then you also have Tekaki Yamashita as the animation director. He was previously key animator, layout artist on Summer Wars and Girl Leapt Through Time. But he was Hosoda's mentor at Toei, was animation director on his Digimon and One Piece projects back then. He's a very important piece of the puzzle for Studio Chizu and works with them ever since. You know, I love shouting out all these collaborators. It's not just that we're going through the IMDb crew list or reading off Wikipedia. I really think that it's key to Hosoda, this sense of collaboration, maybe in a way that it isn't so much at the forefront of the story of somewhere like Studio Ghibli, which is very much Miyazaki focused. Hosoda likes to talk about ensemble filmmaking, where these artists can put their stamp on the film. And in interviews and press notes for Wolf Children, he talks about that. Particularly one aspect of the production that bears this out is how he works here with a smaller animation team, so that each animator would then take on more of the actual drawing of certain scenes, and that would have a particular effect for him on the finished animation. Here's a quote. When working on movies with tight schedules, you usually have about 70 people with about 5 to 20 cuts each. But I want my staff to really think about the characters' feelings throughout the entirety of the scenes they work on. If you only do a handful of cuts just to animate the motion, for example, it's hard for them to grasp the essence of the scene. We believe animators are actors. We want to create animation through acting. Therefore, we wanted our key animators to do at least 50 cuts each, so that with them we could convey the expressions and the changes the characters undergo as the scenes progress. So it's almost like the animators are just seeing the character through the entire scene rather than doing the key animation, the key moments, the important moments. So he's really bringing his animators' point of view, their expressiveness to the fore. We talked about how Hosoda's international reputation was building throughout the previous two films, and I think that reaches a new level here with Chizu, and they very much want to reveal this film to the world. And when they announced the film, they announced that they've already secured a rollout across 34 international territories and countries, so it's not just going to sort of piecemeal go to festivals after a Japanese premiere. And in fact, Wolf Children has its world premiere in France in June 2012, which is just before its Japanese release in July, a few weeks later. In Japan, it wins all the awards that we've mentioned in the past. Japanese Academy Award for Animated Feature, Mainichi Film Award in the same category. It's a big box office hit, outgrosses some awards and everything to date. In fact, it's released a similar time to Pixar's Brave, and it beats that at the box office. It ends the year number 5 at the Japanese box office for Japanese produced films, which is great. Just shows that he's really now on the level of major franchises and the sort of level that we talk about Ghibli as well in terms of placements at the end of the year. But all the way back earlier in Ghibliotheque, Jake, I like to quiz you about what potential competition these films have at the box office from Hollywood productions. So Wolf Children outgrosses all Hollywood produced films that were released in 2012 apart from one. The highest grossing Hollywood film in Japan in 2012. It's a big franchise. Ensemble cast.
Guessing it's The Avengers.
Ooh, if we were on QI, the klaxon would be going.
Ah, interesting. Big franchise ensemble cast in 2012. Oh God, that's a long time ago now. That's almost 10 years ago. Is it a film I would have seen?
You've definitely seen it. Directed by a filmmaker that we've talked about before and admire as well. This is a franchise that by this point had been going for 15 years, is still going now. In fact, might have 2 entries coming up in the next 2 years.
Oh, it's Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol.
It is indeed. Highest grossing Hollywood film in Japan that year.
Wow. I would not have expected that. Like that one was solid at box office, but not mega. That's really surprising.
I think the big
film.
Good film. The big takeaway from that is Avengers didn't make that much money in Japan comparatively to something like
That's what you never bet against Tom Cruise.
I think in that, if you look at the takings that year, Avengers takes about as much as Amazing Spider-Man in Japan, and they are both outgrossed by whatever the contemporary Resident Evil film is that year, and then way above all of those is Ghost Protocol.
How interesting. Wow.
But that's all by the by. What we're talking about here is Wolf Children, which was a box office hit in its own right. International acclaim, played at the London Film Festival. That's where I saw it all those years ago. And really sets him up once more, Hosoda, as an international filmmaker of renown. But how renowned is he amongst the three of us? We should talk about Wolf Children itself.
So Jake, you said in the intro that you kind of expected this one to be the most Studio Ghibli kind of related film that Hosoda's made so far. Did it kind of live up to your expectations of that?
Yeah, it really did. I think there is so many reference points that we can see from in this film that we could draw lines to in Ghibli films. But I think it's very much a Hosoda film at the same time. I think in the way that it approaches narrative, in the way that it approaches characters, that is very Hosoda. As we've spoken before, that this kind of heightened melodrama and big concept wrapped around what can be very much human relatable problems. But I think his interests here in nature, in agriculture, are really fascinating. I think stylistically, you can see why it was imagined that he could take on a project that would eventually be directed by Miyazaki. I think you can really see that here. I think you can also really see there's a softness to the characters and the nature that reminded me a lot of Yonobayashi's work. I think it looks a lot like Arrietty to me. And it looks a lot like Mary and the Witch's Flower. It's really clean. I think the character design is really lovely. I think the backgrounds and the nature is incredible, and it has to be for the story to work because that is so integral to Ame's role in this. Like, you need to make that nature be kind of so desirable that you can get into that character's headspace as to why he'd want to be part of it. But I think as much as it is stylistically got this Miyazaki feeling, if we were to compare it to a Ghibli director, like, it's his most Takahata film as well. Like, you've got those sequences where it's like taking 5 minutes to talk about the process of planting potatoes and like doing documentary style like shots of that process, and like just the way that water drops onto leaves and the way that it will linger on those individual movements of whether that's nature or people interacting with their environment. Like, that's such a Takahata thing from Only Yesterday. And Pompoko, especially here, like, you can see that relationship between humans and the wolves and the kind of encroachment on that natural space, and trying to kind of find that balance between humanity and nature, which fascinated, well, Takahata and Miyazaki. But even like the design of the wolves and the foxes, they look so like the ones in Pompoko. Like, you can really see the Ghibli-ness that he's bringing to this, which we haven't seen in The Girl Who Leapt Through Time or Summer Wars before. And I suppose, just to draw another comparison into the Ghibli gumbo that I've brought up there, we mentioned in our Ponyo episode the kind of apocalyptic event that needs to happen to draw everything together and give everything this drama for drama's sake. And I suppose even down to it being a flood, we get a similar feeling there too. But that is to say, I enjoyed this film. Yeah.
I suppose an aspect that this film has that a Ghibli film probably would never have is actual bestiality happening so clearly and obviously very early in the film. What did you make of all that, Jake? The wolf romance sequence of the film.
It's interesting. Like, so with Pompoko, we get the testicles, but we don't get the bestiality. And this one, we get the bestiality, but we don't get the testicles. And you know, maybe there's a nice midpoint where we get to see everything. Wouldn't that be nice? What did I make? I was quite surprised that the intimacy was shown to the extent it was, to put it delicately. But I think it's so sincere that you don't really shy away from it. And the building of the relationship between Hana and Wolfman is so well done. Like, it's so romantic and so believable. Going back to those silent sequences, those are some of my favourite bits of the whole film. And I think Hosoda's a really skilled silent filmmaker. We saw this just after the grandma character dies in Summer Wars. You have that amazing long tracking shot that goes alongside all of the characters, just kind of as they're feeling this moment. And he, like, that shows his skill as an animator, and I suppose his rhythmic skill as well, that you don't need to be telling people what's going on, but if you show the right people in the right place and you move the camera in a certain way, you can translate such huge emotions. And that montage when Hana's pregnant for the first time, and it's not in a kind of Western rom-com way, like, aren't I a klutz, and like, oh, don't I look massive and all my dresses don't fit. It's actually just really sweet and tender, and you get so invested in them that, yeah, when you see them when you see them have sex, or when you see him kind of when you see his dead body and thrown in the back of that garbage truck, like you really kind of feel the strength of these emotions, whether those are positive or negative. What did you think? Because I was worried that at the start this was just going to be like, when I kind of gathered what the plot was going in the first 5 minutes, I was like, oh no, is this just Twilight? But it's not at all. But it is, I suppose, jarring that the romance between a wolf and a woman is at the center of what is a very sweet kids film. How do you think it walks that tightrope?
Well, it's funny how kind of normal it all is. I think that lovely silent sequence at the start, just kind of showing their romance and Hannah's pregnancy, it's so kind of romantic and sad. But I think it's because it shows those kind of little everyday moments. Like, he brings her a little tin of canned peaches when he finds out she's pregnant, and all the kind of small things like him cooking dinner, even though it's like he goes and hunts a pheasant.
I think that's
and brings it back.
Like that recurring motif of her making the yakitori and dipping it, and like that coming back throughout is. We've mentioned in all the episodes how good he is with his food, but like absolutely just tying that to the relationship so strongly, and like that sequence where they're kind of sharing each other's lives through those meals with each. Oh man, so good.
Yeah, I think like it does really well at like grounding like a big idea like that.
It speaks to that sort of gentleness that Satoku Okudera talks about in the storytelling, where this is after two quite high concept sci-fi films, time travel movie, war on the internet, and Summer Wars and Go Let Through Time. This is a fantasy film, but it's a fantasy in the everyday film where really the Wolfman is just I suppose, a metaphor for some form of difference, some form of mystery. And
the thing is that it's similar to how we can view Porco Rosso in that respect as well, isn't it? Like, this is like we are kind of meant to assume more that this is reality, but I think it's so realist in a lot of other respects that you can you get the metaphor straight away. Absolutely,
but also it doesn't necessarily nail down the metaphor in any way across the film in a way that means you're always recontextualizing yourself towards it, because you could say, is this metaphor for him being an outsider in terms of ethnicity, in terms of class, in terms of being a spy, and whose perspective is the story being told from? Is it from Hannah's point of view, late in life, telling the story of this mysterious sort of mythical absent father that by that point could have been a man, or could have been a wolf man, could have been a person who just sort of came into her life and left very quickly in a tragic way. The way that those stories do take on mythic properties through a mixture of mourning and grief and nostalgia and love. So there's something very poignant about that, and then using the metaphor then as the shift goes from the romance between the two of them, the Twilight aspect, as you say, Jake, to the single parenthood, to then the coming of age of the children. The metaphor then takes us all the way through that to the point where you have the very real, very simple parental thing of, I've given birth to a monster, it's messing up my house, it's chewing the walls, what do I do? All the way through to the kids have an aspect to them that is fully their own, that their single parent can't understand, which is their wolf identity that they have to reckon with. And we can read that in so many different ways, or project all sorts onto that, but there is something quite universal at the heart of it, which is we all have inside of us this one wolf. And whatever that is, when we come of age, we've got to reckon with that and find our place in the world. So it's a really poignant and quite powerful metaphor that runs through the film, I think.
Absolutely. And Michael, I have a dog. That's pretty much the same thing as your experience as a parent. So I get it, I feel those depths of emotions. I can imagine as a parent, this can is such a kind of heightened emotional watch. It was emotional for me. But I can't imagine what it would be like when you're watching this and you are imagining your children in those characters. You can't not. And whether it's from like the character animation of the kids, which is so funny and so delightful and so real, like when they're moving as humans and they're moving as dogs, wolves, and I totally recognise that behaviour in mine. But in the depth that they give kids, I think is something that's rarely seen. Like how you're able to really go on a journey with those two kids and see them go on, essentially break up as siblings, which is something that most siblings will do. Like you're not just linked together forever in all the things that you like. Like you become your own people away from your parents and away from your siblings, and that's not something that you see very often. I think you maybe see like the kid going off to uni, and that's a regular thing. But these two picking their own paths and kind of being violent towards each other, as well as kind of having this admiration, but they're not trying to force a relationship there that isn't right. Like they are recognised as individual people themselves. And I love that, providing that autonomy to kids to allow them to go like that. I was a bit frustrated where like the kind of resolution for the daughter was to become the societal expectation of what a girl is, by having the dress and joining the other girlfriends. But there's so much of it on that side of things that I really, really loved. And we haven't mentioned how it looks. Like this, it's incredible. I never thought that anyone could do skies, clouds, trees, as well as Ghibli could. But you've got to kind of just take a breath with this, and the film kind of encourages you to take that breath as well. Like to just think on what you've been watching, the story you've been engaging with. Look at this cloud. Look at the way that this water droplet drops onto this leaf, and experience that, and kind of think on how enormous the themes of this actually are, but how accessible they are as well. It's really, really good. But it's just a shame that it goes down into that kind of apocalyptic drama route in the last half an hour, because I don't think it needs any of that. I think like the characters, the metaphor is so strong, you don't need to pile on a load of other stuff to it as well.
I don't really see it's argument time in this podcast. I don't really see that like big apocalyptic drama. I see it's a big storm and they get stuck at school, and like this feels very small and contained to me, like compared to something like Summer Wars, where it's like, oh, actually now there's a nuclear bomb dropping or whatever. And I think it works really well. And that kind of I feel like it's kind of necessary in terms of like splitting the characters up, because it is kind of that inevitable, like kids have to leave home, everyone has to go their own way, and you see kind of Ame, like the younger child, I guess, like reckoning with his own identity and realizing, I guess, that he has to kind of follow this like unknown side of him, whereas Yuki is kind of choosing to, I guess, live with it but join society. And I guess if we're talking about it as like this kind of like, you know, it's like more kind of realistic, and there's a lot of metaphors going on, kind of, I guess, in terms of like gender roles, that character of Yuki kind of starting as a character that just wants to be a wolf and doesn't really care, and then very quickly realizing that you have to kind of hide certain parts of yourself and change if you want to be part of society, and kind of her whole journey is like she really wants to go to school, she really wants to like do all this stuff that normal girls do, and then kind of realizing that means not fully being yourself is like a really I think interesting progression for her.
I think I would prefer that line if the film approached more of a sense of tragedy, maybe, in that way. That I think you can see this with kids, where you might love something about them when they're a toddler, when they're young, when they're so free spirited, and when they kind of might dull themselves down to feel like they need to fit into society. I think that can like that is something that everyone goes through, but it's quite a sad thing as well. And I think I'd like to see a bit of sadness in that with Yuki, because I think it presents her doing that as a good, necessary thing. And I think there's a grey area to it. And with the flood, I think it's just frustrating that the thing that provokes Ame to do what he needs to do is this external force. Because what I like about the film is that it's really kind of trying to push autonomy onto these kids and like promote this independence. And the fact that it's this outside force that makes that happen is a bit annoying. Like, I'd rather like that it's fully his own choice to do it. And he's just a bit annoying. I think like maybe that's the thing. Like when he's full emo, he is just a bit annoying. When he's like, "Sorry, Mom," and then like walking out the door and leaving the door open, and it's just maybe I just found him more annoying than the event, whereas everyone else, and even Ame up to that point, I thought was such a curious and engaging character, and again not the kind of like this shy but rich character is not one that's often drawn, and I thought all of them were so intriguing, and I think he just became a bit thin at certain points near the end. Like he's reminded me a bit of Jughead from Riverdale when he's like, "I need to be alone." It's like Jughead saying, "I'm a weirdo. It's who I am."
Well, dog years go quicker than human years, so I guess he's just growing up extremely fast, and he's 10, 17 when he's 10. Yeah,
Wait,
he's got the
dog years are times by 7, so he would have been 70.
He's actually an old man.
Yeah, Ame's going into a home.
Grumpy old bloke. Yeah, that's what he is at that point.
That's why he wants to be alone. Yes.
But I mean, we have so much tragedy in that opening, and I think the film is good for not trying to heighten, like, best itself at the kind of the Wolfman's death. Like, I think there's so much like small tragic detail throughout the film. Like, I think, you know, she can't bury her own like husband and the father of her children because he just gets dumped in the rubbish truck, and the only picture she has of him is his driving license. And I just like those kind of little details where like she has like barely anything of this person who's like affected her life for longer than they've been together, like by the end of the film, like with her kind of 10 and 12-year-old kids, and that's just kind of changed the whole course of her life. And I think there's like some really nice like moments for reflection in the film that make that so pertinent. I mean, yeah, she literally moves to the country and learns how to grow potatoes, like because this guy has kind of come into her life at this point and just completely taken it on a different course.
Yeah. So we jumped from moving to the country to flood, and we didn't really get into that middle section, which is maybe my favorite bit of the whole film, because it is like a anime version of Grand Designs, because Steph, you've recently got into Grand Designs, and you know, the best Grand Designs episode always have tragedy at the heart of them, or melodrama at the heart of them, where it's like, so how much have you spent? Oh, we've accidentally doubled our budget, and also my wife is pregnant, and also my friend is dying, and all the while I'm going to be the project manager because we don't have a budget anymore. And this is her like taking on all of the weight of a great Grand Designs, and doing it in such a lovely fashion. Like we haven't had a great cleaning montage yet, and we got that here. Just the satisfaction of her working her way around the house. I think she was already doing the roofing on the first day that they moved in, which
she's got to work quick.
Yeah, it's so good. Like that, and like going to the mobile library. That was something that I had, because I lived out in the country when I was young. So like this van rolling up, and you'd go and pick out your copy of Captain Underpants. I really loved like just when it was just exploring this hub of the country house for about half an hour or so, and like the surrounding area and the people and the farming, just total bliss. And it's combined with this music, which I think is really different and so lovely, and reminds me of Sigur Rós, when they're not being like big epic Sigur Rós, when it's just kind of being jangly, kind of not totally melodic Sigur Rós, and it's all it's kind of like almost stream of consciousness, bells and whistles type music, and it's just so beautiful. Great section.
I love that section because it's, again, in a very gentle way, exploring the theme that we come back to throughout his films, which is about human connection and community, and that paradox or contradiction perhaps about being in a built-up city with thousands of people around you and having no support network and no one cares and there's no connection, and then moving out to the country where maybe it takes a bit of time to gain the trust of the ornery blokes in the field over, but they will look out for you, they will help you, and the bonds are stronger, can be formed stronger in places like that. So that contradiction in terms between it, where people are sparser, that are more sparsely populated, places that are more sparsely populated, that connections can flourish.
There is,
I think it's a very positive film about humanity, to be honest. Like, you know, like we talked about Cartoon Saloon's Wolf Walkers, and the plot of that film is very much kind of humans versus wolves and humans hunting wolves, and that's kind of what I was expecting going into this film, just because that's a very kind of popular narrative for, you know, people turning into potentially dangerous animals. But I think, the thing that really comes through with this film is maybe humans are inherently good. There's a lot of kind of connection and forgiveness, where you don't really expect it to happen, and kind of the final, I feel like the final message is that kind of even though you might be far apart, you're still kind of connected to the ones you love. You can still hear their little wolf howl on the wind if you listen closely. So I think it's a really positive movie about humans, surprisingly.
Absolutely. I did also think, though, how much money did he have saved up? Because he's he left me a small amount of money, but that was enough money for me to raise 2 kids in the city for 4 years, go out and restore a massive house, and then maintain that lifestyle whilst then getting a part-time job that's on less than what a high schooler would earn. What job allowed that much money to be saved? But there we go. That and the flood, those are the flaws.
What Wolf Children gets wrong about single wolf motherhood? It sounds like we're all very much entranced by quite a lot of Wolf Children here, so we should probably move on to our final segment, the Hoss Order, and see where it ranks alongside the other 2 films so far. Okay, Steph, Jake, time to rank these films, these beautiful, delicate, wise films that must be put in order of best to worst.
Jake, how we rank all our children, isn't
it? Absolutely. Jake, I'll come to you first. Where does this rank next to the others?
I think because maybe just because Summer Wars was such a nice surprise for me, that's still going to keep the top spot. And then Wolf Children, and then Girl Who Let Through Time at the bottom for me. What about you, Steph?
This is far and away my favourite so far. So Wolf Children at the top, and then still Girl Who Let Through Time, then Summer Wars.
I probably would go Summer Wars, Wolf Children, Girl Who Let Through Time. Wolf Children is a film I really admire, but despite what you just said, Jake, about wondering what it's like to watch this film as a parent, it doesn't push me over the edge emotionally. I love the metaphor, as I said. I love what it's doing, and hearing you 2 talk about it is really making me want to go back and watch it again, but it's one of those films I probably prefer to talk about rather than watch. So
that's brutal, mate.
No, I said I love talking about it. I love watching it too, but I probably prefer talking about it with you 2. That's not necessarily being brutal. I'm not chucking the film in the back of a garbage truck.
I know me and Steph are pretty beautiful people, but I don't think we're quite as beautiful as Wolf Children.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing to say some films grow and seem more beautiful in the mind after watching it. I think that's actually quite a unique and beautiful thing in its own way. But so I'd probably put this middle table for now, but I think all of them are pretty fab so far.
But what's up next?
Up next, we have more animal hijinks. We have The Boy and the Beast. So
I'm very curious about this one because, I mean, this one is a bit of a Beauty and the Beast story. And then we've got The Boy and the Beast. And then Belle, which is also a retelling of Beauty and the Beast.
he likes his beasts.
He does.
But until then, listeners, please get in touch about Wolf Children or any of the films so far. We're on Twitter at Ghibliotheque. We're on Instagram, ghibliotheque.pod. We also are on email, ghibli@little.studios.com. We're also on Twitter individually. You can follow Steph at _Steph Watts.
You can follow Jake at Jake H. Cunningham.
And you can follow Michael at Michael J. Leader. And if you haven't already, you can still buy the Ghibliotheque book. It doesn't contain any of the films that we've just been speaking about in this series. But if you like the ones that we have been talking about, hopefully you'll like those ones as well.
Ghibliotheque is a Little Studios production. The show is produced by Michael Leader, Jake Cunningham, Harold McShill, and Steph Watts. Our music is by Anthony Ying, and James Payne is our editor. Hi listeners, thanks for sticking through the credits once again. So Nirasaki, the grandpa character that reluctantly helps Hannah grow the potatoes in her garden, he was played by the legendary actor Bunta Sugawara in his final film role out of almost 200 films. But you might recognise his voice in some other animated films. He also voiced Kamaji in Spirited Away. So there's another grumpy old guy who has a soft spot for the main protagonist but doesn't really want to show it.